There comes a time when the most powerful response isn't shouting louder, proving your point, or defending your worth. It's silence. Not silence born from fear or avoidance, but silence that rises from strength, the kind of silence that says, I know who I am, and I won't waste my breath proving it. Acting as if nothing bothers you isn't about pretending. It's about choosing peace over chaos, self-respect over ego, and resilience over reaction. It's an act of radical self-care, of walking away from what dims your light and choosing not to bleed for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. When you stay quiet, you get to watch people expose themselves. You get to see who really cares and who only love the parts of you they could control. Sometimes the loudest answer is your absence. And sometimes the deepest healing begins when you stop explaining yourself, stop defending your emotions, and just live in a truth that doesn't need validation. There's a quiet power in letting people think what they want while you rise. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every comment needs a comeback, and not every storm deserves your energy. Be silent not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to know what's not worth your voice. Silence is often misunderstood. People will look at you and assume your quietness is weakness, that your stillness is submission, or that your lack of reaction means you've given up. But the truth is, silence can be the most courageous choice you make. It's not that you don't have the words, it's that you've finally realized not everyone deserves to hear them. When you stay silent in the face of provocation, you're not backing down. You're choosing not to let someone else's chaos enter your inner world. You're saying, I value my peace too much to invite this storm in. In a world that constantly urges you to explain, to defend, to clap back, silence becomes revolutionary. It's a declaration that your self-worth no longer depends on how others perceive you. That you don't need to convince someone of your intentions, your value, or your pain. You begin to realize that the people who truly see you never require you to prove yourself. And those who demand explanations are usually the ones who never intended to understand you anyway. It takes immense strength to hold your tongue when your heart is pounding with words. It takes growth to walk away when everything inside you wants to stay and argue. But with time, you'll notice something beautiful. The less you speak in reaction to hurt, the more you hear your own healing voice. The one inside that says, you've come too far to be dragged back into the noise. That voice becomes louder the more you honor it with silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of sovereignty, the kind that knows your energy is sacred and must be guarded, not given freely. And in that sacred space of restraint, something powerful happens. There's a moment in life when you realize that your energy is not limitless, that every time you react, respond, explain, or defend, you're spending something sacred. Your peace, your time, your emotional currency, and not everything, not every insult, misunderstanding, or betrayal is worth that cost. It's not about being cold or detached. It's about being discerning. You begin to understand that just because something invites your attention doesn't mean it deserves it. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to open the door every time someone knocks with judgment or criticism. Some people thrive on drama. They feed on conflict, and they rely on your reactions to feel powerful. The moment you stop giving them what they crave, your energy, you take back your power. You start protecting your peace like it's your most valuable asset, because it is. And the more you do, the more you realize how much of your life you've spent pouring into the wrong conversations, the wrong people, the wrong battles. You've drained yourself trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You've exhausted yourself fighting for clarity in spaces where confusion was never accidental, it was intentional. But you're allowed to say no, you're allowed to walk away without explaining. You're allowed to let people think what they want, while you protect what truly matters, your mental clarity, your emotional well-being, your healing. It's not about being unbothered, it's about being aligned. And when you are aligned with peace, with purpose, and with self-respect, you start making different choices. You don't chase closure, you create it within. You don't argue to be right, you choose to be free. You don't prove your value, you embody it quietly. Because the truth is, energy is not just what you give, it's what you become. And when you spend less time reacting to the noise, you have more space to hear your own voice. And in that space, sometimes the most honest thing you can do is say nothing at all. When you go quiet, when you stop defending your choices, explaining your boundaries, or justifying your feeling, something remarkable happens. People start to show you who they really are. Without your words to guide them, without your explanations to soften the truth, you give them the space to reveal their true intentions. You begin to see clearly who respects your silence and who panics in it, who gives you space to breathe and who chokes on the stillness, desperate to pull you back into chaos. Silence is not passive. It is deeply active. It observes. It listens. It discerns. When you stop filling the space with your need to be understood, you start noticing how others occupy that space in your absence. Do they lean in with curiosity, or do they fill it with assumptions? Do they ask, "Are you okay?" Or do they accuse you of being distant, cold, or dramatic? It's in your silence that you learn which relationships are built on connection and which were built on control. There is a sacred clarity that only comes when you stop talking long enough to hear what isn't being said. Words are powerful, but presence, or absence, can be even more revealing. When you pull back, you learn who reaches out. When you stop explaining yourself, you see who truly listens. When you stop giving endless chances, you learn who valued you only when you were easy, agreeable, or available. Sometimes you have to pause the performance of being the bigger person, to simply observe who benefits from your effort. And when you stop doing all the emotional labor in silence, you realize how many people were only loyal to the version of you that kept giving without pause. And the more you witness in that silence, people will see your calm and call it cold. They'll see your boundaries and label you heartless. They'll say you've changed and you have, but not in the way they think. You didn't become distant because you stopped caring. You became still because you were tired of drowning in everyone else's emotions while yours went unnoticed. Acting unbothered doesn't mean you've stopped feeling. It means you've stopped bleeding in front of people who never tried to stop the wound. It means you've learned to carry your hurt with dignity instead of handing it over to people who only ever held it carelessly. This isn't about pretending you're okay when you're not. It's about choosing to process privately what you used to spill publicly. It's about pulling your power back from the places where it was constantly being drained. You've cried, begged, explained, forgiven, repeated, and broken yourself down trying to be understood. And now you're done. You've chosen to rebuild not loudly, not dramatically, but inwardly, quietly, and on your own terms. Acting unbothered is an act of protection, not pretense. It's learning that your peace isn't a performance. It's learning to be okay with not reacting, even when your silence is misunderstood. Healing often looks like withdrawal, not because you don't feel, but because you feel so much and finally understand how deeply it's been costing you. So you take a step back, not to punish others, but to return to yourself. To sit with your truth in stillness, to sort through the hurt without the pressure of proving anything. Because this version of you, the one who chooses not to react, not to explain, not to fight for crumbs of understanding, this version is tired of trauma masquerading as loyalty. This version has decided that healing matters more than being right, that being whole matters more than being heard, and in the quiet strength of that choice, there's a certain kind of freedom that comes when you finally realize this truth. Not every comment deserves a response, not every insult needs defending, and not every act of cruelty requires you to match it. For so long, you may have felt responsible for explaining yourself to make others see your heart, to prove your good intentions, to defend your decisions. But with time and a few hard lessons, you learn that peace isn't found in constant explaining. It's found in letting go. You don't owe anyone a reaction, especially not the people who twist your words, deny your experiences, or thrive on your emotional unraveling. Your silence doesn't mean you don't feel deeply. It means you've learned to guard that depth. It means you've finally accepted that someone's inability to see your value doesn't make you any less worthy. There's no reward for over-explaining yourself to people who have already made up their minds. There's no healing in constantly justifying your boundaries to those who benefit from you having none. And there is no peace in reacting to every little thing that pokes at your soul. You don't have to match someone's chaos with your calm. You don't need to prove that you're not the problem when someone projects theirs onto you. You are allowed to say nothing, to walk away, to hold your dignity in your hands and quietly protect what's left of your emotional energy. Silence, when chosen from a place of self-awareness and self-respect, is not passive. It's power. It's wisdom. It's a refusal to let someone else's immaturity rob you of your healing. And as you step further into this quiet strength, you begin to understand your worth was never meant to be debated. It was meant to be honored. And if someone can't see that without an explanation, We're often taught that the loudest person wins, that the one who argues best, defends hardest, or speaks with the most passion, is the one who walks away in power. But real power, the kind that lasts, doesn't scream. It doesn't fight to be seen or heard. It rests quietly, confidently in peace. And peace, though quiet in sound, is deafening in presence. When you choose peace over reaction, stillness over fury, distance over drama, you speak a language that only the truly grounded can understand. There's something profoundly disarming about someone who refuses to argue. Not because they're dismissive, but because they've outgrown the need to be right. It takes strength to hold your center when someone is trying to pull you out of it. It takes grace to look chaos in the eye and say, "I'm not coming with you." You start to realize that every argument, every confrontation, every emotional spiral, it comes with a price. And the question becomes, is it worth your peace? Is being understood worth being drained? Is proving your point worth losing your clarity, your calm, your sleep? There's a maturity in choosing to disengage, to prioritize emotional safety over winning. And when you make that choice enough times, people start to notice. They see that you won't be baited into disrespect, that you won't lower your energy just to meet someone in their rage, that you're not afraid of being misunderstood if understanding costs you your soul. Peace doesn't mean you don't feel, it means you feel deeply and choose not to let those feelings rule you. It means you trust yourself enough to know that walking away doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. And that the loudest message you'll ever send might just be the one you never say out loud, and in that quiet refusal to be shaken. In a world that moves at the speed of reaction, where opinions are fired off before thoughts can even settle, silence becomes a radical act. It becomes a space not just of absence, but of deep presence. When you finally stop talking, when you stop explaining and defending and trying so hard to be understood, you begin to hear something that's been there all along, yourself. Your inner voice, your intuition, the quiet truths buried beneath the noise, they begin to rise. And in that rise, you find clarity. Silence doesn't mean avoidance. It doesn't mean you're ignoring the pain or the confusion. It means you're choosing to sit with it, to feel it without having to perform it, to hold it without having to narrate it. Sometimes the answers you're chasing aren't found in more conversations or louder arguments. They're found in stillness, in the pause after the heartbreak, in the breath between the trigger and the reaction, in the quiet morning where no one's demanding your attention and you can finally ask yourself, what do I need right now? You begin to see more clearly when you're no longer clouded by the pressure to respond. You realize how many of your choices were reactions rather than intentions, how often you've spoken from fear instead of truth, how much you've absorbed from others simply because you were too busy to listen inward. But silence slows you down. It brings you back. It reconnects you to what's real beneath all the roles you've been playing. And in that clarity, things that once seemed impossible start to make sense. The red flags you ignored, the relationships you kept trying to fix, the boundaries you were afraid to set, the versions of you that were performing instead of living. All of it becomes visible when the noise fades and your soul finally has room to speak. And once that voice becomes clear, there's a turning point in your growth where you realize that emotional control isn't about suppression, it's about wisdom. It's not pretending that you're unaffected. It's knowing exactly what affects you and choosing how, when, and if it deserves your response. Mastering your emotions doesn't mean you're numb or disconnected. It means you've sat with your pain long enough to recognize its patterns. You've seen how your anger rises, how your fear disguises itself as control, how your sadness sometimes wears the mask of silence. And instead of being ruled by these waves, you've learned to watch them not with shame, but with understanding. Because emotional maturity isn't loud. It's not reactive. It doesn't need to announce itself. It shows up in the quiet decisions, choosing to breathe instead of lash out, to walk away instead of engage, to stay centered when the room wants to spin. It's in the moment you feel triggered, but choose not to let that trigger drive your actions. It's the sacred pause between feeling and doing, the space where freedom lives. And let's be honest, it's not easy. Especially when you've been conditioned to fight, to prove, to react. Especially when people expect the old version of you, the one who used to respond emotionally just to feel seen. But when you start mastering your emotions, something powerful shifts. You no longer hand over your peace to people who haven't earned access to it. You no longer chase closure from conversations that only open new wounds. You no longer react just to feel alive because you've learned that true aliveness comes from within. not from the drama that surrounds you. You begin to understand that your emotional control is not just a skill, it's a form of liberation. It's what allows you to stay soft in a world that tries to harden you, to stay kind in moments that beg for cruelty, to stay grounded when everything around you is pulling you to come undone. You become the calm in the storm, not because the storm doesn't rage, but because you've stopped letting it define you. And from this space of mastery, and so, you begin to understand not through noise, but through the sacred power of silence that healing is not always loud, and strength is not always seen. There is a quiet kind of transformation that happens when you stop trying to prove you're okay and simply choose to be. When you stop chasing reactions, defending your worth, or explaining your pain to people who never intended to hold it with care, you realize that being silent isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That acting unbothered isn't about pretending, it's about protecting. It's about reclaiming the emotional space you once handed over so easily. Because what you tolerate teaches others how to treat you. And what you no longer entertain teaches you who you've become. You're no longer the person who needs to fight for a seat at someone else's table. You've built your own one where peace is the guest of honor and clarity sits beside you. You don't need to argue to be right. You don't need to react to be seen. You don't need to break yourself open just to be understood. The people meant for you will feel your silence as clearly as they once heard your voice. Let them misunderstand you. Let them sit in the story they created about you. You're not responsible for correcting every version of you that exists in someone else's mind. What matters now is how you see yourself. What matters is how you protect your energy, guard your healing, and honor the softness you fought so hard to preserve. So be silent not to disappear, but to return to yourself. Act as if nothing bothers you, not because you feel nothing, but because you've learned what's no longer worth your spirit. That is not pretending, that is power, that is growth, that is peace, and in that peace, you become untouchable.